Hello and welcome back to the From My Perspective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football and NFL landscapes that could be changing the football landscape in the very near future. So it's been a minute since I've been able to put out an episode. I've been dealing with some other things. The voice will probably give you a little bit of a hint as to what those things are. But we're finally back, and we're back just in time because the new coaches poll just dropped. That preseason coaches poll has come out, and there's a couple things in here that I really liked, and some things that I should have thought about a little bit more whenever I was doing my top 25 list. And there were some other things that, for a lack of a better term, they confused me and did not make a whole lot of sense to me, and we'll be able to go all over those. So I've got 3 things I think the coaches poll got right, 3 things I got wrong, and then 1 undecided because I'm pretty just kind of in the middle about that last one. So stick around for those, and if you don't mind, go ahead and hit subscribe real fast. Doesn't do anything for you, but it helps me out a ton. So yeah, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. Make it easy, make it quick. The first thing they got right, they didn't just copy and paste over the rankings from last year. They actually thought about it, and there were a couple easy pitfalls that you could have fell into whenever you were making this. Like, you could have just put Georgia in the top 2 because they are the reigning national champion. I don't believe that they should be in there, and they ended up being at 3, which I think is a reasonable starting point for them. It could have been easy to put Cincinnati still somewhere in that top 10 to 15 since they're coming off of a college football playoff bid. I don't think with everybody that they just lost, I don't think that they'll be in that range, so it makes more sense that they got bumped down into those mid-20s like we saw them do, including the old powerhouse schools that look like they could be new forces like USC, Texas, Miami. It was important. I don't believe that they'll all stick, but it was important to get those represented to at least show that those teams will be impactful. Of course, your Mountain West representatives and your other, some of those other programs that are kind of on the wings, we know they're good, but, making sure to kind of emphasize these big programs, I do think was a smart call on the coaches poll. And it feels reflective of a real poll, which I think, obviously that sounds a little goofy, but some of these that we've seen put out do feel kind of copy-paste, or they feel like they're not really predicting as much, whereas the coaches poll, you can see some of those predictions kind of coming into play and, predicting that the USCs of the world are going to take this huge jump and Cincinnati's going to fall back and things of that nature. So it gave itself a little bit more credibility, to me at least, just in the fact that it wasn't too similar and didn't stick too much to what we knew from last year. Now, there is something that I think did kind of stick from last year that I do not feel makes a whole lot of sense, and it's not like this wide gap, but I don't think Notre Dame is on that top 4 bubble. I don't think that they're really a college football playoff contender this year, but sure enough, they came in at 5th in this poll, and while I kind of get it, I think that they'll still be a top 10 team. I had them, I believe, at 8 on my predictive top 25 polls from however long ago. I think that 5 might just be a little bit too much. 8 kind of felt like a little bit too much whenever I was doing that. I could see them in the top, from 8 to 12 range, 8 kind of being my high point right now. And, maybe Marcus Freeman gets these kids playing harder than they ever played for Brian Kelly out of the gate, and they do get into that range, then have at it, great for them. But as of right now, I'm not just totally in on that. Plus, you got to look at their schedule, and that's really where I got caught up, is because when you look at their schedule, you've got Ohio State, week 1, then you got BYU, you've got Clemson, and you've got USC. So that's 3 schools that I believe were in the top 15 or 16. I don't remember exactly where USC finished, but that's 2 college football playoff schools that are listed on this poll. And then you've got 5 who has to play both of them and presumably lose to both of them to be in that spot. So, looking at that, it kind of confused me. If they finish at 2 losses, they're not going to be at 5. And that's realistically what you have to project them at, unless you have Ohio State losing a game and still being the second best team in the country, or you have Clemson being able to edged them out in the top four, despite the fact that they lost to them. So, the logic part was kind of a disconnect there. But speaking of Clemson, that's one of the things I think they got right. Clemson getting their swagger back. Obviously, the big worry right now is quarterback, and everybody wants to get caught up on that. But quite frankly, if you've got a front seven like Clemson does right now, you might not even need a quarterback to play. You could probably just run Wildcat, have a receiver toss it, because you're only going to need about a couple scores to stay in any game and potentially win any game. That's how good their front seven is. So you've got that just super strength on your defense. They came along very well at the end of last year, started piecing it together despite the cold start out of the gates. And if DJ's really not all as great as we thought he was going to be, you've got Cade Klubnik. Just throw him in there. It wouldn't take too much, and he looks like a very, very talented quarterback. Last time I can remember Clemson having to swap out a quarterback in favor of the guy behind him and somebody that was younger was moving from Kelly Bryant to Trevor Lawrence, and we all know how that worked out. So Cade Klubnik could be the key to getting them into that top four. I personally think he will be. And yeah, putting them inside that top four. Dabo Swinney's a very intelligent coach. If he needs to make the play, he needs to make the switch, he's going to make the switch. I can't say that I believe that they'll be down for long. And last year was, I don't want to say a fluke, but it was something that I would not expect to see again. There's not really a natural transition between this one and the next one, so I'm just going to jump into it. We've got Texas A&M. I don't see A&M being one of those top football teams in the country, primarily because most of the hope that's coming around A&M is from this most recent incoming class of freshmen, and you're now putting yourself in a position to say, the real thing that A&M needed was a bunch of freshmen, and that'll help them win the SEC. Like, no, they still need to develop. And the quarterback situation, that's really where things come into play. That's where I think I could shift around a little bit, and maybe this becomes an undecided, is if Max Johnson comes and starts, it's a very different situation than if Haynes King starts, or if the other kid, I can't think of his name right now, but I know it's like a true 3 QB race right now, and that's kind of where everything lies right now. If Haynes King comes in and isn't as special as we thought, or is only running the ball and really doesn't have that quarterback presence that we hoped he could, then yeah, they're not going to be a top 7-8 team. If Max Johnson comes in and kind of limits the team's ceiling, yeah, they're probably going to be a 9-win program. Like, there's mostly quarterback questions for me here, but also I just find it weird that the big hook and the big reason to get them up right now is because of, for one, a ton of NIL money, getting a lot of those high recruits into the building, and for two, the fact that it's a bunch of 18-year-olds that we're kind of betting on and being like, yeah, these are the missing pieces. They could very well be the missing pieces, but it'll have to be next year or the year after when they actually have some seasoning. So I'm very much uncertain on A&M, but at least the SEC as a whole is a pretty, I don't want to say sure thing, but one conference was kind of reflected as an uncertain property right now in the poll, and I actually think they got that right. That being the Big 12, you could see Oklahoma, Baylor, and Oklahoma State all stacked up 1, 2, 3 next to each other, because that's how close this conference is going to be. I actually would have flipped that. I would have had Oklahoma State being on top, Oklahoma at the bottom, but I can't be too picky because maybe it's a little bit of favoritism towards Oklahoma because we're used to them being up there. I just think there's a little bit too much turnover personally. But yeah, like, just the fact that I'm basically self-debating this issue proves what I'm saying and why I think it's right, because you've got two programs who don't traditionally have stars but rely on really, really good coaching and really solid being a unit in Baylor and Oklahoma State. And then you also have Oklahoma that usually has stars, but they've had a lot of theirs leave. You've got a new head coach. There's a lot of curiosity, I'm going to say, because the Oklahoma fans have certainly gotten on my case about being too mean, because I think half their roster leaving is a big deal, but that's besides the point. I think that Oklahoma will almost have to take a step back, and these three aren't even the only Big 12 schools representing the list. We'll get to talk about the other one here in a second, but it's going to be tough at the top. It really is, and it's hard to predict who's going to come out on top of there. I had Oklahoma State in the college football playoffs. I could easily see Baylor knocking them off and being in that spot themselves, or Oklahoma, surprising me And, Dylan Gabriel is somehow this phenomenal quarterback. He comes in, leads them. Maybe they're in the CFP or, whatever. It's an open race. It's an open game. And I cannot personally wait to see. This is probably the most interesting conference to me. There's one more that we'll get to talk about a little bit later on that I am personally intrigued by as well. But at the top, I don't know how much closer you can ask for than what the Big 12 is going to have. A team that I do not expect to factor into the top of that is Texas, which is the next one, the one I think they got wrong. Who voted for them to be the top team in the country? Like, excuse me? Like, I don't understand. I don't even personally think they'll be ranked. In my top 25 predictions, I had them, I believe, at like the 27th or 28th. Like, they just barely missed the cut. Which, granted, if you put them in at like 22, 23, I can't be mad at it. But to put them inside the top 20 with a top-ranked vote, to be number one, I don't understand it. Like, I don't fully, like, you think they're going to turn around that sharp from last year and become, something just huge and special and giant. I think they'll be a good football team. I don't think they'll be the best football team in the country. I don't think they even come close to that. So just something very confusing to me, and it seems to have been confusing for just about everybody in college football, everybody that watches and is paying attention to the poll stuff. It didn't make a whole lot of sense, but here we are, right? And then finally, I told you guys that I had one undecided that I wanted to talk about, so here it is. We were talking about the ACC and how much representation they got on this. They got 5 teams in total appearing on the coaches poll, and I think it's possible. I don't know how plausible I think it is. For instance, I had 3 representatives, I believe, in that top 25 that I keep referencing. I did not have Pitt. Pitt was number 26, and I did not mention Wake Forest. So those 2 teams have spots on the list. I can't be mad at Pitt, obviously. I get Sam Hartman is cool, and that the Wake Forest head coach is very, very good, but I don't know. The ACC is looks better and looks more poised for a bounce back this year than they were last year, which is, very promising, obviously. And I think 4 is probably already kind of pushing it. 5, you're getting uncomfortable. The best broad statement I can make about it is that the ACC has 5 representatives in the coaches poll, which I feel like is pushing it. But I also can't say that I disagree wildly with any of the inclusions. So, both of those sentences are kind of right for me, and it's very strange. And again, I mentioned it with the Big 12. I think the ACC is probably the second most interesting conference this year because you have, Clemson could feasibly get knocked off. Like, you have Alabama and Georgia in the SEC, and you have Utah and Oregon and maybe USC over here, and, you've got all this different mixing and matching. The ACC feels a lot more open, second most open conference in football outside of the Big 12. So it'll be interesting. I personally would predict 3 to finish the year, maybe 4, because I do think I'm sleeping on Pittsburgh. I think I'm being a little bit too harsh on them. But, yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting. So what did you think was, right or wrong or something you've still got questions about in the coaches poll? Feel free to let me know down below. But for now, that is episode 25 of the From My Perspective podcast. Make sure to subscribe, and as always, I'll see you next time.